Okay, well, it's good to be back. Last weekend we were in Florida for a family wedding. My nephew got married. The bride, Christy, was absolutely stunning the way she looked. And we're always grateful in our family. We think we're a pretty good looking family, but we always like to bring in other people that will sort of upgrade the DNA level of good looks. And I think we accomplished that this time. A funny story was told at the rehearsal dinner. She has two sisters, and one of her sisters is married to a guy who was in seminary with my nephew who got married in Birmingham, Alabama. And at the end of the year, knowing that his sister-in-law was still single, of course, they were looking out for her, and he brought home the seminary yearbook that had the pictures of all the seminary students in it, and sort of pointed out, isn't that kind of a good-looking guy there, pointing to my nephew. And her sister, when she was relating the story, said, so my sister, Christy, looked through the seminary student catalog and picked out somebody. I wish I had a picture of her because she really did look gorgeous that day. And so finally we got that one married off. And they're 33 and 35. John is 33. Christy's 35. So they waited till they found the right person. It just took longer than you would have hoped. Today's Father's Day, so I'm going to talk a little bit about things my father taught me. My father passed away in 1991, and as you know, I like golf. I love golf, and that was one thing we shared a little bit in common. At the funeral home, one of the pastor friends of my dad, he was a pastor, came up and said, I've got a story to tell you about your father and playing golf. And I was one of the guys who got your father to play golf because the Elks Golf Club or Elks Country Club in Massillon, Ohio, had free pastors could play free on Mondays. So a group of pastors from the area, Canton and Akron, would get together on Mondays, and they invited Dad to play with them in their foursome. Now, Dad had never really played golf before. He had hurt his foot pretty badly in World War II and really couldn't do a lot of athletic things. So he got a set of clubs. And at my understanding, this is the story, the first hole, somehow Dad, first time he ever played golf, got the lowest score. And that meant that he got to tee off next on the second hole, which was a par 3 downhill, about 135 yards. So Dad got up on the tee box, and he pulled out his driver. Now, one of the guys in the group, Pastor John Dilling, used to be pastor at Canton Grace Brethren Church, he was a real stickler for the rules. For example, in my group, I don't care what score you got on the hole, we play ready golf, and so I'm teeing off first because I'm usually there and teed off before the guys in the cart behind get to the tee box because you got to keep moving, when you play golf. So anyway, so Dad pulls out his driver, and Dilling goes crazy. He goes, Wes, you can't hit a driver on this hole. It's 135 yards. It's just, you don't do that. And my dad goes, well, it's the only thing I've ever hit off a tee box. I wouldn't know what other club to use. It's the first time I played golf. So Dilling was just very upset. So Dad took a swing, and he topped the ball. It bounced down the hill and rolled up about 10 feet from the hole. Of course, the other pastors in the group all missed the green with their 8 or 9 irons. And my dad, being a bit of a jokester, really not a bit of a jokester, quite a large jokester, turned to Dilling, and he took his driver, and he said, John, I'm hitting this driver so well, I think I'm going to putt with it too. And I say that, Dad once, when I was in law school, we lived just down the street in Indianapolis from a place called, our apartment was just literally half a mile from a place called Thatcher Golf Course. And I don't want to say Thatcher it was a Muni course. I don't want to say it was a lower class course, but there was a sign on the door, the clubhouse, that said, shirts must be worn in clubhouse. So I'm sure that some of my friends who've played at more genteel clubs like Augusta National or other private clubs, they've never seen a sign like that. And I think it costs $2.50 for 9 holes or $3 for 9 holes. And Dad bought me, when he saw the golf course, they showed up and he bought me a set of golf clubs. And I played golf for about a year and then didn't really take it up again until about 12 years later. But so we go out first time. He buys me this set of golf clubs. Before I had these clubs I'd gotten them from my great aunt. They're things like Niblick, Mashy Niblick. They didn't have numbers on them. They had names, and they were very old clubs. And so I get this new club, and first hole's about 300 yards. So I take out my new driver, and I take a swing with it, and I put the ball in the green about 10 feet from the hole, through a bunch of trees and everything, and it just proved the fact that no matter how cheap your clubs are or how expensive, there's a honeymoon period where everything works right. And of course, I 3-putted from 10 feet for a par. I don't want to talk about that. And well, I could go on about that round, but anyway, I'll have a little bit more to say about that in a few minutes. I didn't get to do a prophecy update last week, and I had oodles of information. And so when Monday came, I thought, well, hopefully nothing will happen this week that I have to. And goodness, it was, who saw that coming, right? I just think it'd be nice to have 1 week off where there's not this massive convergence of events that are relevant to Bible prophecy. A verse to keep in mind as we talk about today's and what we get started on. 2 Timothy chapter 3, this know also that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. In a week like this, I think we see that verse, which is prophetic. In the last days, perilous times would come. And who could deny that we don't live in perilous times? Interesting things they found this I think in Morocco, a fossil of a human that's much older. Now, I don't agree with their dating, and they don't know what they're doing when they're doing the dating, but it's much, much older than anything they've ever found before, and it's upsetting their evolutionary timelines because there shouldn't have been humans that look like this, with skulls like this, at that time. Because we had to evolve over time. Long time. Now it appears that humans appeared much, much earlier than they even thought, which is putting pressure on their timelines, especially when you look at, I've never understood this, whatever happened to wipe out the dinosaurs happens, and essentially evolution has to start all over, right? Because they don't have that much, there's not much life left. So it's not billions of years, it comes down to millions of years on their time scale, and they can't explain it. That's the point. And they don't care because it's a religious belief that they have. And people have religious beliefs. They had a religious celebration in Columbus yesterday. I can't show you the videos that I see from this event every year in the Stonewall Festival Parade in Columbus. By my estimates that I get, 500,000 people attend this thing every year in Columbus. And what's our city population with the suburbs? 1.4 million or so? It means 1 out of 3 people go there. I went to some places yesterday after I finished playing golf, and I have to tell you, it was pretty empty because I think a lot of people were at this thing. And I'm not sure everybody's celebrating it. You know, it talks about this is what it said in the dispatch, more than 200 churches, civic groups, businesses, and other organizations participated in Pride. Huntington Bake Shares, Nationwide, and Wendy's were among the area-based corporations involved. Everybody was involved. Somebody posted something on their Facebook page about Dulles, and that's what the Dulles Facebook page was, their logo was yesterday. And this is everywhere. And folks, I don't want to depress you or distress you, but I don't think it changes. Absent this massive revival that I don't really see predicted in end times prophecy anywhere, absent that, this is not going to change. It's going to get worse, and it's going to be harder for Christians to maintain positions in corporations because of this. I've been talking about this for years, that more and more pressure is coming. In England, Tim Farron was the leader of the Liberal Democratic Party. It's sort of a left-leaning party, liberal, not like the crazy, whacked-out leftists in Labor. They're still kind of crazy, but they're not whacked out like the Labor Party is. And he resigned. Why? Because it finally became irreconcilable for him to be a part of a party that was so contrary to his Christian beliefs. And he's been under tremendous pressure for years to get out of the party. This is what it said in The Spectator. To be a political leader, this is what he said, especially of a progressive liberal party in 2017, and to live as a committed Christian, to hold faithfully to the Bible's teaching, has felt impossible for me. I'm a liberal to my fingertips, and that liberalism means that I am passionate about defending the rights and liberties of people who believe different things to me. Even so, I seem to be the subject of suspicion because of what I believe and who my faith is in which case we are kidding ourselves if we think we live in a tolerant liberal society. And that's coming from a man who identifies himself as a liberal. This is happening everywhere. The things I could tell you about, I hope you appreciate. I didn't sleep much last night or the night before. And I literally could have stayed up 72 hours straight and not got through everything, every example that I could give you on this issue alone, let alone all the other stuff that I try to touch on each week. And this is from a couple weeks ago in Australia. I don't know if you remember Margaret Court. She is one of the, if not the greatest female tennis player of all time. I mean, we all know about Serena Williams. She's won 23 major titles, like U.S. Open, Australian, French titles. There's 4 possible ones each year. She's won 23. Margaret Court won 24. If you add in her doubles, mixed doubles, doubles titles, she won 62 major titles. Serena's somewhere, I think, in the 40s. But she is and I'm not going to get into the specific theological orientation of Margaret Court, except to point out that she's a Christian. And she has written things in the past complaining about the recruitment of younger female tennis players by other lesbians on the female tennis tour, the professional tour. And she's married, she has a family, and she came out recently and said that she's concerned about this. We have a female soccer player in America who is a Christian, and because the team was going to wear the rainbow uniform or something to honor gay LGBTQ pride, she quit the team. Good for her that she stood up and at great risk to her career and her talent and everything, she said, I just can't do this. It's inconsistent with my Christian values. And so, you know what the reaction mostly was from people? Well, good riddance. You're going to be like that, you bigot. We don't care if you're the best female soccer player on the planet. We don't want you. And that's what's coming in business, in government, mark my words. And so Margaret Court, they have a tennis stadium in Australia where one of the major tournaments is played called Margaret Court Stadium. So now what is the push? Everybody in professional tennis, almost to a person, is saying, we need to rename that stadium because we could not have a stadium named after a bigot. The greatest female tennis player of all time is now unacceptable. They'll name stadiums after Pete Rose before they ever name another one after Margaret Court, by comparison. You remember this controversy this was just a year and a half ago. You know, things happen so fast. This is from January of 2016. It seems like an eon ago when this female professor, tenured professor at Wheaton College, the evangelical Harvard they call it, came out and said you should wear a hijab in support of Muslims. She said Muslims and Christians worship the same God. How many times have we heard this nonsense? And she's at an evangelical Christian college, and so the college said they put her on leave, and they said, and they were going to fire her, but they eventually entered into a separation agreement. And my recollection is that she's now at the University of Virginia. She's a visiting professor there. And she's gone from Wheaton, but they then wanted to go after the people who were sort of bringing her up on charges at Wheaton. And I don't know the end result of all that. You can look it up. But in connection with that, in the Resurgent blog, a professor named Russ Vaught, V-O-U-G-H-T, wrote an article in January of 2016 defending Wheaton College's position and their statement of faith. And he said, he was an alumni, and he said this. Wheaton had said, Islam, and this is the statement they issued when they got rid of her or put her on suspension. While Islam and Christianity are both monotheistic, we believe there are fundamental differences between the two faiths, including what they teach about God's revelation to humanity, the nature of God, and the path to salvation, and the life of prayer. That's what Wheaton said a year and a half ago. Russell Voigt wrote in this blog that essentially defending the statement of faith. The Atlantic Monthly came out with an article this week talking about Bernie Sanders, who was questioning Russell Voigt because he's been nominated for a position in the Office of Management and Budget in the Trump administration. So he had his confirmation hearing this week. And Bernie Sanders, the millionaire leftist that wants to take all of your stuff, one of the biggest hypocrites in the world, in my estimation. This is what Emma Green said in The Atlantic. Sanders took issue with the piece Vaught wrote in January 2016 about a fight at Wheaton College. The Christian school fired a political science professor, Lucretia Hawkins, for a Facebook post intended to express solidarity with Muslims. And she was also photographed at a pride event, commiserating with those people. Vaught said this: Muslims do not simply have a deficient theology. They do not know God because they have rejected Jesus Christ as Son, and they stand condemned. So guess what the great Bernie Sanders, the great liberal, tolerant person that he is, and the icon of the left, and he's a communist. He and his wife honeymoon in Russia at the height of the Cold War. I mean, what kind of person does that? A whacked out liberal, leftist, communist, Marxist. That's who does that. And so this is Bernie questioning Vaught this week.
Let me get to this issue that has bothered me and bothered many other people. And that is in the piece that I referred to that you wrote for a publication called Resurgent. You wrote, Muslims do not simply have a deficient theology. They do not know God because they have rejected Jesus Christ, his son, and they stand condemned. End of quote. Do you believe that that statement is Islamophobic?
Absolutely not, Senator. I'm a Christian, and I believe in a Christian set of principles based on my faith. That post, as I stated in the questionnaire to this committee, was to defend my alma mater, Wheaton College, a Christian school that has a statement of faith that includes the centrality of Jesus Christ for salvation. And
again, I apologize. Forgive me. We just don't have a lot of time. Do you believe that people in the Muslim religion stand condemned? Is that your view?
Again, Senator, I'm a Christian, and I wrote that piece.
Well, what does that say?
With the statement of faith of Wheaton
I understand that. I don't know how many Muslims there are in America. I really don't know. Probably a couple of million. Are you suggesting that all of those people stand condemned? What about Jews? They stand condemned too?
Senator, I'm a Christian.
I understand you are a Christian, but this country is made up of people who are not just. I understand that Christianity is the majority religion, but there are other people who have different religions in this country and around the world. In your judgment, do you think that people who are not Christians are going to be condemned?
Thank you for probing on that question. As a Christian, I believe that all individuals are made in the image of God and are worthy of dignity and respect regardless of their religious beliefs. I believe that as a Christian, that's how I should treat all individuals.
And do you think your statement that you put into that publication, they do not know God because they've rejected Jesus Christ the Son and they stand condemned, do you think that's respectful of other religions?
Senator, I wrote a post based on being a Christian and attending a Christian school that has a statement of faith that speaks clearly with regard to the centrality of Jesus Christ in salvation.
I would simply say, Mr. Chairman, that this nominee is really not someone who is what this country is supposed to be about. I will vote no.
No, Bernie Sanders, you're who this country should be about. And you should have the guts to resign because you are
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
an intolerant boob. He's putting a religious
To my
test
colleagues
in.
on the Senate committee, I hope that we are not questioning the faith of others and how they interpret their faith to themselves. Thank you for your willingness to serve our country.
That's Senator, I think his name's Cory Gardner from Colorado, Republican. And he's like, what are we doing? Really, what are we doing? This led to a great article in the Wall Street Journal called Christians Need Not Apply. Let me just read a few paragraphs from that. Does liberalism have any room left for Christians and other believers? The question has been posed countless times, and each time liberals answer more decisively than the previous no. On Thursday, Britain's Liberal Democrats delivered that message to their leader, Tim Farron, forcing him to resign over his mildly conservative views on homosexuality and abortion. The Lib Dems supposedly carried the torch of 19th century classical liberalism, though more recently it's difficult to distinguish them from any progressive party anywhere. And listen, Dr. Erdman spoke here a few months ago about how progressives acted in the French Revolution. And what did they do? They beheaded tens of thousands of people. Don't talk to me about tolerance or being concerned about the views of people on the left. During a TV interview on April 18th, this is Tim Farron, he was pressed 4 times, and 4 times he demurred about homosexuality. Quiescence wasn't enough. Pressure mounted, and the next day, Mr. Farron relented. No, he clarified in his remarks at the House of Commons, homosexuality isn't a sin. That still wasn't enough. The latter-day Glutkins and Ivanors needed to be sure that Mr. Farron believed this in his heart of hearts, not merely as a matter of public confession. If he didn't think homosexuality is sin, asked a BBC interviewer a few days later, why had it taken him so long to say so? Mr. Farron was reduced to spouting gibberish. Then the Guardian newspaper unearthed a 2007 interview in which he suggested that abortion is wrong, but also cautioned Christian activists that immediate outright ban would be impracticable. Confronted with his own words on the campaign trail, Mr. Farron pleaded that he'd never advocated abortion restrictions. It wasn't enough. See, the concept they're having trouble grasping is conscience. Mr. Farron's politics recall the liberalism of Gladstone, Chesterton, and Isaiah Berlin, which treated conscience as king. Today's liberalism has triumphed so spectacularly over the claims of faith and tradition that it has nothing left to conquer but the individual conscience. That is why modern liberals are so unmagnanimous in victory. It isn't enough to emancipate transgender people. You, rabbi, must adhere to a strict pronoun guidelines and feel in your soul that Chelsea Manning was always a she. It isn't enough to legalize abortion. You, Tim Farron, must like it. Liberals welcome believers insofar as religion can be deployed in service of liberal causes, to be sure. But any expression of theological or moral judgment is met with hostility. And then he goes on to talk about, and I think rightly labels it, a tirade by Bernie Sanders against a good Christian man merely because he holds to Christian principles. We are so far gone in this country, folks. And this is what 2 Timothy chapter 3 was talking about, that in the last days, perilous times will come. And we need to deal with it. It's going to cost people their jobs. And so how does the church going to react when people in congregations lose their jobs? Is the church going to stand up and help those people? Are Christian businesses? If you just went out as a Christian business and said you're only going to hire Christians, what would happen? You get sued for discrimination. It says this, if you disagree with someone's theology, in other words, it must mean you hate him. And this happens in the church. This is what the emergent church has talked about. If you disagree with me, you hate me. I'm a lawyer. I guess my whole life is based on hate because my whole life is an argument with somebody I disagree with. Yet at best, this Wall Street Journal says, at best the West has stood for the opposite principle, that people can build and share a democratic public square across and even through such differences. That principle is decaying across much of the West, and authoritarian adversaries like Vladimir Putin are no doubt trying to accelerate its demise. But it wasn't Mr. Putin who made Western politics so inhospitable to large segments of society and to conscience. And look, we can talk about the Trump investigation. This, how can I say this without somebody saying, oh, you worship Donald Trump? Okay. Disclaimer, I don't worship Donald Trump, okay? He happens to be the President of the United States. And there are things about him. I've said this. I don't know why I have to be an apologist and detail everything that I dislike about the man before I say I support him. So I'm just going to say, I support some of the things that he's doing. I have concerns about others, okay? I'm a human being. But for crying out loud, folks, this Russian investigation thing is the most ludicrous thing I've ever seen in my life. Do you not think that if they had one shred of evidence, that stuff wouldn't be leaked to newspapers all over the place? And so now, the guy who he was told to fire Comey, now they're investigating him for obstruction of justice for firing Comey, which he has every right to do. Even liberal Democrat Alan Dershowitz says there's no crime here, folks. And so what did Mueller do? Did Mueller just say, there's nothing here? Comey has said he's not under investigation. And he just said, go easy on Flynn. So what did Mueller do, the special counsel? He hired 13 lawyers. 13 lawyers. Do you think they're going to stop until they find something? Not stop until they find something? I agree with the president. I see this and I'm like, it's nuts. Then we had this. The shooting of a congressman, attack on Republican congressman. There's no question what he did. The guy was found with a note in his pocket with the names of the Freedom Caucus Republicans. He asked, are these Republicans? And when they said yes, what did he do? Came back and he shot him. Pray for Congressman Scalise, who is, I understand, been upgraded from critical condition now. He's doing a little bit better, but he still has a long road to recovery. He had very severe, he was at risk of imminent death, is what the doctor said at the hospital. And the reaction to this is David Froome. This is what he said. Virginia, no background checks, no licensing, no registration, no permit required for concealed carry of long guns, open carry long guns, and handguns. Now listen, this statement is idiotic. Okay? This is what he tweeted. First of all, how do you, unless you're, I see we have one really tall person here today, because I did one of those, and I'm fairly tall myself. Unless you're like 7 feet tall, how do you conceal carry a long rifle? I mean, really, I mean, I don't understand it. This man is so deluded by his leftism that he has lost the ability to reason. Somebody tweeted in response, there are background checks in Virginia and you don't conceal carry long guns. Why do you never do any research? Good for Charles Cook. The interesting thing, though, was how this, so they went to the ball game and they had a group prayer out by second base, which Stephen Scalise was supposed to play in the game. Look at how CNN reported it. Members of the Democratic team gather on the field for prayer before the congressional baseball game. Fox, same picture, essentially, said, watch, both congressional baseball teams observe moment of silence at second base. So one of those is a lie. It was either a joint group or not a joint group. This is what CNN does. They have not corrected this. Okay, so you can really say in this case, that is fake news. I don't like calling things fake news, but that is fake news. Because you know why? It didn't happen that way. It was a lie. I don't practice, yoga, but I mean, I'm going to pop a blood vessel here, I think, as we go on. And then New York Times comes out with this stupid editorial, idiotic, moronic editorial. Moronic is, I guess, given the scale that morons are, I'm giving it faint praise, I guess. And so what did they do? Well, they said they go back to Gabby Giffords. And see here in this top paragraph on the right, though there's no sign of incitement as direct as in the Giffords attack, liberals should, of course, hold themselves to the same standard of decency that they might have of the right. That is a bald-faced lie. That was proven a bald-faced lie. It came from a guy named Paul Krugman. I guess the standard for Nobel Prize, and they gave him, but what he said was, well, Sarah Palin, you remember how the argument went? Sarah Palin had a map of congressional districts that they wanted to target. And it had crosshairs on that. So they said Sarah Palin had incited the guy to do that. And it was false. And here we are 8 years later, and the New York Times is still propagating a bold-faced lie. Now, they retracted it the next day. But do you think they've repented of this nonsense? So, Victor Davis Hanson writing in National Review, Let's Make America Great Again, or that history has not been very kind to countries that enter a state of multicultural chaos. You can look that up at National Review. I don't have time to get into it. Here in Canada, a couple things going on in Canada. Boy, pray for our people to the north. First of all, there's a school district in Alberta, and that school district, the school board in that district, I can't remember the name of it, it's something River, I think, Medicine River or something, has asked a Christian school in that district, they may use district classrooms or buildings, that you need to stop reading certain Bible verses to students. It's a Christian school. It's based on the Bible. And now government thinks we can tell you which ones you can read or not. It's not going back the other way. Let me tell you. There's a lot of theories about the deception that has to come upon people before they believe the lie of the Antichrist. And I have friends who, they talk a lot about UFOs and fake extraterrestrials and demonic beings and all this stuff. And it may play out that way. I'm not denigrating them for that reason alone. But I'm just saying is at this point, I don't think the Antichrist, when he comes on the scene, is going to have to break a sweat to get people to believe the lie. He's not going to need to make up holographic UFOs. Because why? Because people are going to believe him. They've gone so far down that trail that, it's sort of like, you got to push somebody over the edge. Boop, they're gone. And I think that's what it's going to be like. And so here's Canada. At least the Senate there has passed a radical law forcing gender theory acceptance. Listen to this. The bill adds gender expression and gender identity to Canada's Human Rights Code and to the Criminal Code's hate crime section. With the Senate clearing the bill with no amendments, it requires only royal assent in the House of Commons to become law. I'm not sure what royal assent means. I assume it means a vote, yes vote, aye. We vote aye by a voice vote. I don't know. I'm not Canadian, so I'm just going to guess. Critics warn that under Bill C-16, Canadians who deny gender theory could be charged with hate crimes, fined, jailed, and compelled to undergo anti-bias training. I would say, from what I've seen, I wouldn't worry about that being a possibility. It's going to happen. Wake up. Foremost among the critics is University of Toronto psychology professor Dr. Jordan Peterson. By the way, look up his stuff on YouTube. I don't know if the guy's a Christian or not, but he's taken a stand for truth. And he's saying this is what's going to happen. Who, along with lawyer D.J. Brown, told the Senate committee that Bill C-16 is an unprecedented threat to freedom of expression and codifies a spurious ideology of gender identity and law. Justin Trudeau, the boy king of Canada. Great news. Bill C-16 has passed the Senate, making it illegal to discriminate based on gender, identity, or expression. And look what he puts there. Pound, hashtag, love is love. Jordan Peterson said, Senate passes Bill C-16 without amendment. 67 for, 11 against. Compelled speech has come to Canada. We will seriously regret this. Now, I dug into some of the legal reasoning behind, or the reasoning behind the people that are pushing this. I'm just going to read a little bit about this. These are people who say that people who just go on the basis of human-caused climate change aren't going far enough because they need to take other things into consideration. These come from social psychology and sociologists at the university level. This is one of their journals or books, Research, Action, and Policy Addressing the Gendered Impacts of Climate Change. Now, I'm just going to read it, okay, and then after church, you can come up and tell me, you can translate it as to what it means, okay? For many years, climate change discourse was dominated by a technical scientific framing based on modernist notions of objective knowledge, control, and efficiency. In recent years, a robust alternative discourse of climate justice has emerged, challenging mainstream adaptation and mitigation policies as reinforcing capitalist, colonialist, and patriarchal power structures and further marginalizing already vulnerable peoples and communities. It goes on. But while the climate justice movement has provided a sorely needed corrective to climate change discourse, it has been hampered by addressing only policy issues without critically examining the scientific knowledge on which climate change discourse is based. Drawing on critiques of science and technology from ecofeminism and feminist scientist studies, we argue that scientific knowledge is always already structured by social power relations before it ever enters into policy discussions. In the place of illusory God trick of absolute knowledge and control of a global climate system, we use Haraway's ideas of feminist objectivity, partial perspective, relations between species, and cyborg standpoints to situate and pluralize knowledge about climate change. This intervention opens up discursive space for multiple partial knowledge about the climate system, all of which can be held accountable to their ethical and political implications. This polarization of knowledge allows feminists to recognize and support many forums and venues of climate change-related activism, moving beyond the impasses of international and national political negotiations. I'm surprised they use periods and commas in this thing. Thus, far from dismissing climate change, a feminist critique of climate science makes possible a range of interventions that can more effectively promote social justice and ecological health. You know that stuff they clean out of the barns that the horses leave behind? This is a level below that. But do you understand the dire situation that we're in? I heard somebody say we're doomed. For example, let's say the writer of this became nominated for the director of the EPA in America. And somebody brought this up. What would happen? The person who brought it up would be declared a bigot, anti-woman, right? Because, of course, this makes sense, but Russell Vought, who cites historical Christian texts, is a bigot and gets voted down by a guy like Bernie Sanders. It's crazy, but it gets worse. It really does. This is a statement released by the General Assembly this week, a report, and it's titled Promotion and Protection of All Human Rights, Civil, Political, Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, including the right of development. Report of the independent expert on protection against violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Okay, so if you've looked around the world, you'll notice that there are a lot of places where society and government and countries are in complete turmoil and meltdown. Throughout Africa, the Middle East, Asia, it's a mess. And I would say we're at least in a cultural civil war in the United States. And the shooting may have begun. You need to consider that possibility. And I'm not advocating violence. By the way, the guy who wrote that did the shooting of the congressman in Alexandria, Virginia the other day, he belonged to a Facebook group. You can look it up. Terminate the Republican Party. And now they're saying we don't advocate violence in this group. Well, it's really good, guys. Great job. Way to stand up. And now the report comes out, and this is the Human Rights Council supporting this nonsense. It doesn't really even make sense. But look at a couple things that they say. The theme of the report is diversity and humanity, humanity and diversity. The phenomenon of violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity is both local and global. By the way, there were pride marches all over the place. Tel Aviv, Columbus, Chicago, San Francisco, New York. Were there any injuries reported from people attacking them in the United States, in Israel? There might have been injuries from people, getting heat stroke from not wearing enough stuff on floats, but do you understand how ridiculous this is? In recognizing everyone has some form of sexual orientation and gender identity, there is the regrettable reality that some groups and persons are affected by violence and discrimination precisely because they are viewed as having a sexual orientation and gender identity that is different from a particular societal norm. This is what the people that want global governance, this is what is acceptable to them. They are completely changing the structure of society. Even Camille Paglia, who is a lesbian, feminist, has come out and said, there's male and female, folks. That's it. And so now we're denying the obvious. We're denying DNA. We're denying science. They're denying science. And the eco-feminists, they're denying climate change science, but nobody gives them grief. But here's the rub. Paragraph 25, action against violence and discrimination has been espoused more recently in the 17 globally agreed Sustainable Development Goals to which all countries are committed with a framework of 2015 to 2030 for operationalization. Goal 16, which covers inclusive societies and access to justice, aims to bring about substantial reductions of violence and to promote anti-discrimination measures on the basis of leaving no one behind. An all-inclusive approach invites effective coverage of all persons, whatever their sexual orientation or gender identity. And there you see it again, the Sustainable Development Goals. Remember, they're pushing the smart cities stuff. Patrick Wood's going to be here at our conference the end of August. He's going to talk about technocracy and how it's playing out. I'm going to be doing a presentation on it at that conference. And as long as if people stop doing, just 1 week, stop doing this so I can get something else done. Okay. So somebody on the, when I said I wasn't going to do a thing last week, somebody posted like, yeah, in response to, have you ever heard John Haller? And the person says, yeah, I listen to him every week, but he scares me to death. And I'm like, I'm not even bringing in a lot of the stuff because I don't think you're ready for it. So, look, what did Paul told us? Perilous times will come. Perilous times are here. Days of Noah, days of Lot. We're at that time. And there is an urgency to what we need to do as Christians to get through this. And now we have the month of Ramadan. So far, 950 dead, more than 1,000 wounded, and we're only maybe halfway through. This appeared on a number of websites, Sears, Walmart, other places. Social justice, buy these T-shirts to support your solidarity with Free Palestine. Now, some of them have removed them in response to complaints, but they made it there. You know, so who's thinking this? And then this. This murder, cold-blooded murder of this lovely 23-year-old border policeman outside the Damascus gate in Jerusalem. Now, I stood in the place where she was stabbed just a couple weeks ago. Some other people at church, Carol and Joe and Jody and Joan, you were there just the other day at the Damascus gate. It's a major entry and exit point to the old city of Jerusalem. And I remember walking past these young soldiers who were checking me out because I had a backpack. And they wanted to see. And they were looking at eyes and they were asking questions and stuff like this. And now one of them is dead. I mean, it happened right around 7 p.m. as everything was shutting down in Jerusalem. Now, this is in the part of East Jerusalem which would be called the Muslim area, although there's a lot of Jews that live there. There's some big Orthodox neighborhoods there. And you see the knife, the plastic knife that was used to stab her to death. At least I think that's the knife. They had guns, and more would have been killed, but the gun jammed. They shut things down. What happened was, and this happens every year, and I think this will not happen in the future, in order to come into the city of Jerusalem from areas of what they call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, you need to have an entry permit. Because it's Ramadan and Muslims want to go to the Temple Mount for Friday prayers, they issue extra permits. In this case, this year, they issued 250 or 300,000 extra permits to permit Palestinian Arabs to come into the city for Ramadan. 3 individuals came in. Now, ISIS has taken credit for this, but a lot of people don't believe that ISIS took credit for it. Hamas has also kind of taken credit for it, but not taken credit for it. There were some Hebrew videos put up by ISIS, speaking in fluent Hebrew, a message to the Jews, the first enemy of the Muslims, another one that said, we're coming to slaughter the Jews, grandchildren of monkeys and pigs. And this lovely young gal is dead. She's murdered. And this is a picture of her taken at the Damascus Gate not too long ago, where she works. She could have gone into the Navy, but she wanted to be in the Border Patrol, even though it carries a much greater risk. Because we saw checkpoints all over Israel when we were there, because we were going in and out of Palestinian areas. And I know the people that were just there saw them. And soldiers like this get stabbed and killed at these checkpoints. That's why when you see them, they do have their finger pretty close to the trigger when somebody approaches them. Why? Because of experience tells them that they need to be careful. But this is what the BBC put up on their headline. Look at what the headline is in the BBC Twitter account. There were 3 guys who did this attack, and they were shot and killed. They were terrorists, right? What did the BBC put up in their headline? 3 Palestinians killed after deadly stabbing in Jerusalem. Now, Netanyahu complained, and they eventually changed it to an Israeli policewoman stabbed to death in Jerusalem. But you know what? Prime Minister Netanyahu should not have to do that. Thinking people, in other words, thinking people mean if you put a mirror up to your mouth, you could actually make it fog. I mean, you're breathing. People that can do that should be able to know how to put a headline up about what actually happened. But they can't, because they're deluded. They've lost the ability to reason. They've been given over. Here's a picture on the local Palestinian village website. They sent a contingent of soldiers out, and my understanding is this says, "Glory and immortality to our righteous martyrs." And when you go through that area that they wrongly call the West Bank, you will see monuments to these terrorist murderers, subhuman people that do this, and they're glorified throughout. I'll tell you what. We can start the clock now. Let's wait. What's the over-under whether Mahmoud Abbas, who governs the area from which these guys came from, how long will it be till he condemns this? How long will it be till Jeremy Corbyn condemns this? Any number of people. How about Barack Obama? I mean, he's got all kinds of spare time now, right? He's going to come out and condemn it, right? Start the clock. Get one that's plugged in, because batteries will run out long before you get this. And so this morning, here is the scene that takes place down near Ashdod as this young lady is buried. Down here, this is a selfie that she took and sent to her friends about 10 minutes before she was stabbed to death. This is every day we're taught, we're given examples about how fragile life is, how it can be here and boom, gone. 7 soldiers, or 7 Navy seamen on the USS Fitzgerald. Whether they were sleeping or whatever they were doing, they're gone. Just like that. This young lady is gone just like that as these soldiers, buried her today in Ashdod. And they gave her a 21-gun salute. So, this is the nature of the conflict. When we were in Israel, I'm going to have to do a separate teaching on this, but Hebron is the epicenter of the conflict between the descendants of Jacob and the descendants of Esau and Ishmael. And you see it at the cave of Machpelah, which Herod built this massive structure over the cave where Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah are buried. There is no doubt that this is where they were buried. There was a tradition there. There was recognition of this fact for centuries, for millennia, for 2,000 years before Herod came on the scene and put up that building 2,000 years ago. Over 2,000 years ago. And the building is incredible. It's been through earthquakes, and it looks like it could have been put up yesterday. I mean, this Herod guy really could build. And so what's happening now on the world scene? There is no doubt, let me repeat, no doubt that is a Jewish holy site. It is where the patriarch Abraham and his son and grandson are buried in their wives. So what does the UN do? So we have this group, the UN over here, they can't even determine gender. Now we present them with this evidence of a building that stood for 2,000 years over something that the Bible said happened over 4,000 years ago. You can read about it in Genesis. Trying to remember what chapter. I want to say 17 or 18. But it says in verse 19 of the chapter, I can't remember. And after this, Abraham buried Sarah his wife in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre. The same is Hebron in the land of Canaan. In the Torah written by Moses. And the field and the cave that is therein were made sure unto Abraham for a possession of a burying place by the sons of Heth. What's that mean? He got the deed to the land. And now these people at the UN are coming in and saying, Palestinian. When you go over to Mamre, there's no sound on this. This is one of the 4 sites where Constantine built. It's right in Hebron. It's a mile or so, maybe 2 miles away from the cave of Machpelah. This is called Mamre. This is, in my estimation, and Joel Kramer who led us, 100% guaranteed to be the place where Yahweh appeared to Abraham by the great oaks of Mamre. And you see that in Genesis 13. And then a year later, in Genesis chapter 18, Yahweh returns to Abraham and appears to him there and gives him and Sarah the promise that you will have a son, and the blessing of the Messiah will come through your lineage. And all nations of the world will be blessed because of that. That happened right here. There are places throughout the... if you see this white area of exposed bedrock here, and you go a little bit to the left, there's a kind of a circular area. I believe that's one of them. Joel said, what's that? And I said, well, it's round. It's Israel. They need water because there's no water around here. I'm dying of thirst already. It's a cistern. He says, no, that's where trees grew through the bedrock. Yahweh met Abraham by the great oaks of Mamre. You can go and stand and for millennia, for 4,000 years, over 4,000 years, every culture, every society, every person who's ruled that area has recognized this as a very significant place, a holy place. They built churches, they built temples. You can see here there's a trench dug down through here. That's where the sacrifices from the altar would have gone. Or the blood from the sacrifices at the altar to the right would have gone. Back there in the corner, you see the raised area. And this is, you see the buildings of Hebron right there. And Hebron didn't grow over this. It grew around it. Why? Because they all felt that it was holy. Now, some of them didn't know. But we know why. Because we have the Bible, right? And so you can go and stand in this place, and you can see where there's evidence of Herodian construction. Constantine built a church there. Herod thought it was holy. Herod built over at Machpelah because he thought it was holy. He built at the Temple Mount because he thought it was holy. He wanted to have a place where they could make religious pilgrimages. Now, he may have been doing it to try to make some money off of it, but he did build where these holy sites were. And Constantine built here. He built at Bethlehem. He built at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and up on the Mount of Olives. Because these were holy sites to Jews or Christians. Genesis 13, then Abram removed his tent and came and dwelt in the plain of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and built there an altar unto the Lord. And then in Genesis 18, Sarah laughs in her tent, remember? And when you stand there, you can almost, it's funny because there's a Palestinian Arab school above you, up back to the right, and the kids were out at recess playing soccer, and we're kind of joking back and forth like, you know, are you really the best soccer player? Or, you know, you don't look like I was saying you don't really look like that good of a soccer player. And I don't know if I brought up American football, but in any event, you can hear the kids laughing, and it reminds you can hear Sarah laughing kind of in the background. And then we went up after there, we went to the Tell at Hebron, and you come across here and you will see the cave of Machpelah come into view right there, the building that Herod built. Now going across the middle, going and stopping there left center of the slide. And Joel, when he takes you there, he reads one verse. Matthew 1:1. Why? Because not only is the cave where Abraham is buried, and Isaac and Jacob, but Jacob had 12 sons, right? One of whom was named Judah. And when they came back into the land, Judah got a tribal possession that included Hebron. So when you stand there, you're standing right in the middle of Hebron, the area of the tribe of Judah. And so there's the cave. Off to the left is Mamre, a mile or so away. No man's land down there. This is no man's land that you're standing in. There's soldiers patrolling all over the place. Most people don't go there. There's obvious reasons why. But Matthew chapter 1 tells you why Hebron is important. Matthew 1:1, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham. And this is where David ruled at the beginning of his kingship for 7 years. He reigned in Hebron. And it's the highest of the biblical cities. And the water flowed downhill from this water source to there. So it says this, the World Heritage Committee is set to debate inscribing the old city of Hebron, including the tomb of the patriarchs, to the state of Palestine when it meets from July 2 to 12 in Krakow, Poland. So people who have cracked up mentally are going to Krakow to vote on this. This is a new front in the war over the holy places that the Palestinians are trying to ignite as part of their propaganda campaign against Israel and the history of the Jewish people. Israel's ambassador to UNESCO, Carmel Shama HaKohen, told the Jerusalem Post on Thursday. Now, I want to do this. I have way too much stuff, but we got to get out of here. I know it's U.S. Open weekend, so I had to put the golf thing in, right? But why did I choose this? This is the scene on June 18, 1967. Now, for those of you who may not have gone to Purdue and are math challenged, June 18, 1967 is exactly 50 years ago today. And there at Baltusrol, Jack Nicklaus, won his second U.S. Open, beating the second-place finisher, Arnold Palmer. Two of the greatest golfers of all time. 50 years ago today, Father's Day. And so 50 years later, Father's Day, there'll be another U.S. Open champion crowned today. And I'm going to be watching this. That thing is a mess with, I mean, they're like, 85 people, 85 of the 70 golfers left have a chance to win or something like that. It's incredible. On a course designed by a guy from Columbus in great part. So, but what else happened? Well, 50 years ago was the Six-Day War. That war happened from June 5th through June 11th, 1967. And do you see the parallel? The days of the week are the same this year as they were in 1967, 50 years ago. Isn't that weird? And here were these men, this famous picture, as Israel took back the Temple Mount, the Western Wall, for the first time in decades, they could go and pray at the Western Wall. Somebody last year took this picture. Same guys. Don't be dismissive of anniversaries. So 50 years ago, today, Dad preached 2 sermons, my father. Guess what he talked about? Prophecy in Israel. I was looking through the box. I have all boxes. And I came across, these are his sermon notes from 50 years ago today. And I heard this stuff all the time, okay? I was blessed. Morning sermon, Middle Branch, Ohio. My dad was... well, some people might say he had a problem. He had one of those little label makers. Asked my wife about that. He loved that label maker. You know, one of those things that you press with the tape. And the first time I took her to Johnstown, to Dad's office, I said, "Look at this," you know. And so she's looking. I point to the desk, and there's a label on it. It says desk. So we go around, and I show her the chair. And there's a label. Pam, am I lying? Absolute truth. Yeah, we still have the chair. Do we still have the label on it? I don't know. It still has the label on it. It's in our basement. It says chair. There's a stapler on the desk. What do you think it says? Take a wild guess. He did not label individual paper clips because that would have been mentally ill at that point. But everything had a label on it, you know, paperweight, bless his heart. And so on these notebooks that I have, these sort of half-page notebooks, there's labels on them. And so that's the morning. I'm going to go at least 5 minutes, so if you have to leave, you need to go ahead. And that's Sunday evening. Title, The Crisis in Israel. So there is notes. Now the Wednesday night ones I couldn't find, but I've seen them. So this is a week after the end of the Six-Day War. It's 11 days after they've taken back the old city for the first time in 2,000 years. Israel and Jerusalem in Bible prophecy in light of the Arab-Israeli War, June 5 to 11, 1967. Is there special significance to Israel's capture of Old Jerusalem and the temple site at this time? See there down at the bottom. Well, he says below that underlined part in the middle, it says this. Supermarket other day, talking about Bible events and prophecy, didn't know much about Bible, but he was interested in prophecy. Well, before the Lord can come, Antichrist has to reign for 1,000 years. Not exactly right, he says, but he knew there was to be a 1,000-year reign, and the Antichrist needed cleared. He needed the Antichrist picture needed cleared up a little bit for him. And then at the bottom he says this: today the old city is under the nation of Israel, and they have complete control over it. Does that not mean that the times of the Gentiles are ended? Apparently not. Why? Well, because one, we're still here. Israel today is still in major subservience to the United Nations. They are arguing with the United Nations about this. Yield to mandate the ceasefire. United Nations still going to have a lot to say about the city of Jerusalem. I mean, here we sit 50 years later, and we're still having this conversation. It is the ultimate question of the ages, ultimately one of the main questions of the ages, the city of Jerusalem. I'll do a talk in a couple months, about 6 weeks, I hope, if I get it done, about the Assyrians coming into Israel. And what did they want to do? They wanted to wipe out Jerusalem. Why? Last place the Jews were. Wipe out the Jews, what do we get rid of? These crazy people that believe in a monotheistic God who's going to have a Messiah come. The Assyrian king knew what he was doing. Guess what he was prevented from doing? Wiping out Jerusalem. King Sennacherib. I'll talk more about it. Look at here. Zechariah has a lot to say about this. 10:1. Israel got the land back in 1948, and since they have been replanting and reforesting, planting millions of trees. Trees planted on rocky hills does not have enough to be watered for 4 years before the roots get deep, enough to survive on their own. After that, they have enough to survive on their own. After they grow, their own foresting of hills has caused air off the Mediterranean to cool and increase their rainfall, so that today they're getting. So this is, by the way, does this sound like you know? This was a couple of years before Hal Lindsey wrote that little book about Like Great Planet Earth. So this is what I grew up with. So that's why I talk about it. And seen pictures of them dancing the other week in Tel Aviv. Saw pictures of them dancing this week in Tel Aviv in their gay pride parade. This is not godly. But listen, the scripture tells us that they're going to be brought back to the land in unbelief. Ezekiel 35 and 36. They're brought back, and then what it says, then I will sprinkle water on them. Then I will give them a new heart. So get the order right. Jews back first, then more. We got them back. They're in control of Jerusalem and this conflict. So he went on. I could read all this, but we would be here a long time. But it's interesting. You know, one of the things that Bible prophecy teachers talk about, that I talk about, and that people, Jan Markell in our program talks about it, Tom Hughes at 412 Church, Jack Hibbs, Jacob Prasch, we all talk about what? The neglect of prophecy. 50 years ago, Dad was talking about that. So all you Johnny-come-latelys. No, I'm just kidding. He would be shocked to see the events of the past week and that God hasn't directly intervened. And he says it's neglected because of crazy people. And he cites 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 16, as also in all his epistles, speaking in them of these things in which some things hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned and unstable wrest as they do also the other scriptures unto their own destruction. And he goes on to talk about it. Look, I just got to finish this up. This is a new play. It won the Tony for Best Play on Broadway in New York. Oslo. What do you think it's about? It's about Oslo, okay? Best Play Tony. It's about this. How they got to that. And in his notes, Dad says, well, people say, 70th week will begin by the entry of a peace agreement. He says, no, it's a confirmation of a covenant, an existing covenant. Now, I think it could be Oslo, but I have a list a mile long that somebody sent me on Facebook. I haven't had time to go through, of everything that the Trump administration and the world are trying to do to effectuate peace in Israel. And it goes on for like pages. So it might not be Oslo. I'm not dogmatic on that. It might be a peace agreement that comes on the scene very quickly that future Antichrist will confirm. Could be this. They could modify this a little bit, and that's what is confirmed. I don't know. All I'm saying is, 50 years ago, people who love Bible prophecy were talking about it. 50 years later, a smaller group is talking about it, even though the indicators are going like this, and the interest in prophecy is going like this. And that in itself is a fulfillment of prophecy. Well, I don't think this is prophetic. But Great Britain is in disarray. And this certainly, to me, and I've used the metaphor of a tsunami before that's coming, the tsunami of God's judgment. The world, in my estimation, is on fire. That progressed very quickly from its start. And over 70 people are dead, I'm told. And to me, that's a picture of the world today. The fire's spreading. And when fire's spreading like that, you just kind of, casually mosey down the staircase. What is that? Tim Conway used to do that. Like he was going downstairs. What do you do? Well, one, you run for your life. And you don't sit around and talk about it. So people need to wake up. Because, what was talked about 50 years ago by my dad is even more apparent now. That 50 years of buildup to this. And I'm sure if Dad was here today, he would say, I talked about this in 1967, it was here, and now it's here. But people's interest is down here. People need to get interested. So I'm grateful that we have a church that does talk about this. So let's pray. We got to get out of here. Father, thanks so much for Heritage sound teaching. Pray that we will keep that at the forefront of everything we do at Fellowship Bible Chapel. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.